Hi there, my name's Ben and I like to read. Today we're going to be reviewing a little bit of a different book. This is a collection of poems, actually, from the aptly titled Poetry, a Pocket Anthology, as compiled by R.S. Gwynne. I don't have a whole lot of background on R.S. Gwynne, but there are over 250 poems of varying authors within this little anthology, and I kind of wanted to take this not just as to determine, okay, is this pocket anthology a solid compilation of poems, but more so just to talk about how necessary poetry is in the literary space as well. So I remember when I first got this book. This is actually, again, another book that I was forced to read, parts of it anyway, for another first-year English class that I had to take in university. And I was lucky enough that the professor that I had was not teaching something boring like critical writing, or we weren't reading nonfiction, or we weren't reading fiction. We were doing poetry. So it really opened my eyes, of course, as a young 17-year-old, to really explore the big unknown that was. I had previously thought, oh, poetry's easy, just slap a couple rhymes together and there you go. I suppose how a lot of people consider rap to be easy, but it's really not. There's such structure and such nuance, and you can express so much with so little, or vice versa as well. And I think that's really the beauty of poetry, is that it allows your imagination to run wild. It breaks the shackles that you have, and it gives you a world for your mind to play in. And I think that's so important. So with this one in particular, what I really appreciated about this is that they cover a wide variety of poets as well. I mean, of course, they have Keats, who's a famous one. They have some poems by Edgar Allan Poe, Ezra Pound, of course, who's now, of course, pretty controversial. Alfred Lord Tennyson, T.S. Eliot. But the ones that really stuck out for me were the ones by William Carlos Williams. I'd never heard of him before. It was really almost I would say it was that sort of an enlightenment or eureka moment as soon as when I read him, especially like the Red Wheelbarrow, which is probably one of his most famous poems. And it's, this guy being a country doctor and essentially, on his way to do house calls in the village that he's working at, writing poetry about the nature that he sees on the back of his prescription pads. I don't know, there's just something so evocative of that. And I mean, it goes to show that, you don't necessarily have to train to be a poet. Anyone can be one. Be a successful one, that's a different story, because there's plenty out there who think that they have what it takes, but it's actually it's a competitive field. It's a field where people need to have singular vision in what they're trying to express. Because if you're essentially trying to bullshit poetry, it doesn't work that way. You have to be telling a story. I mean, we covered a long form poem in a previous episode by John Milton in Paradise Lost. And I mean, yes, it's essentially a retelling of the book of Genesis. However, to be able to do it in such verse as he did, not only to dictate it to a scribe, but it just goes to show that you have to have that singular vision in order to truly let your creative and expressive, your expressive forces be expressed, for lack of a better word. Now, I do think that this sort of is going to go a little bit more tangentially. I really do think that you need to put limits on the creative process in order for your mind to truly to tap into the true creative potential of your mind. And what I mean to say is it could be something as simple as, and I do this frequently as well. It was my 8th grade English teacher who taught me this. He used to make us do it all the time. So essentially we were given an assignment, which was you have to tell a story in 50 words or less. Go. It can be whatever story you want. Naturally, but it has to be within 50 words. So naturally, some smart-ass kids in the class, like myself, asked, does the title count as well? He's like, no, the title doesn't count. So naturally, you would write an exceedingly long title providing the context, and then finish it up with the 50 words. But once we took the assignment more seriously, that's really when it started to get into the nitty-gritty of, okay, what kind of story can I tell in 50 words? It forces you to think in a particular way. It forces you to it forces you to make the right word selection, to really trim down that fat of your idea and say, okay, like what are the most important parts that I have to express? And poetry is very much similar, I do believe anyway. You have to have that constraint within your process in order to have a successful poem. Not even just with regards to poetry or storytelling or music, but also in terms of, let's say, if you want to achieve a goal, you have to first set the goal. Right? If you want to have an outcome, you first have to set a goal that puts a constraint on it. So let's say it could be something as simple as losing 100 pounds. So firstly, the outcome is I want to lose weight. You have to put the constraint on there, that goal. Okay, I want to lose 100 pounds. Put your second constraint in there. What time frame? Okay, now that we have more information, we can build, and we have more freedom to create with the routine, rather if we just have a bunch of different stuff all out in the ether where it's just raw creative process. You can't really do much with that, because it's much more difficult to collate an infinite number of variables into a coherent project than it is to put a couple of constraints on there, so that way you narrow down the possible variations, and that way it allows for greater freedom that way. So I think poetry is very much similar in that regard. Like I said, it took a little bit of a long tangent, but I think that's but it is sort of necessary to understand the fact that poetry isn't just as simple as writing down words on a page. Word selection matters, syntax matters. Essentially everything matters, right from the structure of your from what you're actually writing about, all the way down to the rhyming scheme, down to word selection, and even with regards to the verse structure that you're trying to do. Like, are you going to go iambic pentameter? Are you going to go free verse? Are you going to rhyme ABAB or ABBA or anything else? Are you going to alliterate? There's a whole lot of things that you can do, and what's great about it is that you could essentially take, let's say you wanted to write a poem about Robin Hood, right? Now, depending on how you choose to write it, which verse structure you want to go, if you want to put a rhyming scheme in there or whatever, you're going to get two distinct tones from there. You could make a whimsical one, you can make a really, really serious one. That's what I love about poetry. It's so modular, but it's so necessary, because like I said, it does provide that constraint for your imagination, and it allows your mind to just run free within this idea. Particularly nature poetry, I find, does this a lot, because the poets do such a good job of establishing and creating a world that your mind can inhabit within. They can do it so succinctly that it's really, really frightening, but it's amazing nonetheless. So like I said, within this one, this literally takes you throughout history. What I like about this version as well is that the first 54 pages are essentially They're giving you literal and figurative language descriptions. They're explaining stanzas, verses, rhyme structure. So essentially the first 54 pages of this book are telling you how to write a poem. And if you are an aspiring poet, I would highly suggest that you check it out, and at the very least, give it a read, so then that way you can, it may all be basic stuff, but you got to know your basics if you want to end up doing something advanced. Now, the poetry in here, they do have, they have ones by anonymous authors, so ones that we don't necessarily know, but these ones are from like the 1450s all the way up until the modern day, which when this was published, I think this was 2011, if I'm not mistaken. 2012. Yeah, this is what this one is. So again, it's 10 years old, but you have wonderful modern poets like George Harjo and all of those, but then you do get those Sir Thomas Wyatts, and you get the Alfred Lord Tennysons and the T.S. Eliots and all that. So if you're interested in poetry, and if you're thinking, okay, like I think that I'm only consuming one particular type of poetry, I would pick this book up. It's always good to have, especially if you wanna flex on them for a little bit. You have to. It's always nice to know a poem or two. It's always, and it's it's a nice conversation starter as well. With if you ever find yourself in an unbearably hip and trendy party, and you just whip out a poem, and everyone will love you, or not, or they might even think that you're more pretentious than they are. That being said, I do think there is some value in poetry, as I've discussed throughout this video. And I think that more people are consuming poetry. It's just they're consuming it in a different way. They used to consume it through rap music, even through just standard songs, like folk songs as well, which are a form of poetry. As music is evolving, you could still make the case that yes, it is a type of poetry. It is sort of blurring that line, but I think that everyone should, at least read a couple of solid classical poems, as I like to call these, because I think that it's become a lost art in that sort of sense, or I shouldn't necessarily say a lost art. It's certainly not in the mainstream. I really wish we could be almost like Wales. They have I forget the name of their competition, but every year they have they have a very strong bardic tradition in the Welsh nation, and essentially anyone can compose a poem, and they can put themselves forward to essentially be like the best poet and the best bard in the land, and I think that's really cool. It's a great way to keep your cultural heritage alive, but also you're always finding new ways to express yourself and new styles. So I think that's also what's really interesting about poetry. It's just that it's so modular, yet it allows your mind to play. So if you're interested in poetry, if you want to get into it, or like I said, if you just want to pull up and flex on people, I would definitely recommend picking up this anthology, because it literally has every single kind of style of poem that you could want, plus a nice little intro on how to write some poetry if you're interested in it. If you're not one for poetry, I'd say skip it out. That's fine. If you're more of like a nonfiction or a fiction person, or a biography, I don't know why you would be, but go ahead and feel free to skip out on it. If you have a nice little thing, if you have a favorite poem, and if you have some strong opinions about poetry, I'd love to hear it in the comments below. And of course, if there are any poems that you think I should read and potentially do a review on, drop them down in the comments below. Aside from that, thank you so much for watching.